Welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host, Mick Spears, where our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. And we empower modern leaders through knowledge and emotional intelligence to create meaningful impact. In today's episode, we bring you part 2 of the 2-part series with Sulin Lau of Grab. In part 1, where we left the conversation off, she was talking to us about the 4 H's, which is how Grab measures leadership and also individual performance against culture. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I strongly encourage you to pause now, go and listen to part 1 and then come back to us. Now, as we pick up the conversation in part 2, Sulin is going to share with us her own experiences of how she made the transition into leadership. One thing I would like to press on, because you brought up before you're a self-confessed nerd when you started in your career and now you're a leader. What did that transition look like? So for you, and I've really got something in mind for maybe people that are in their 20s now and they're looking forward in their career. What advice would you give to someone that is going to move from that individual contributor to manager to leader? What advice would you give them about what works, what doesn't work, or any mistakes you made along the way?
Maybe I start with the mistakes first, because I think that might be a common experience for people in their 20s, right?
That would be the humility coming through already. But yes, please.
No, because the mistakes were instructional for me. And I joined in 1998, which, it's a year where very few people are hired into the field of marketing, right? So I was the only hire for that year.
Okay.
And I think that because I came in with a bit of a nerdy background, I came in with a quantitative background into marketing and advertising, you kind of believe when people tell you that, you're really good at this for somebody so young, right? It's not because you're really smart. It's just because you come in with a different educational background from all the other people that join around the same age. And so I think there's at least in marketing and advertising, there's a propensity for people to be promoted based on potential rather than capacity or ability to manage. So I had my first team at 23 and I was horrible. I was a very, very good individual contributor. I was a very, very horrible manager. And because people kind of confuse the two, you can be really good at work and you can be really horrible as a leader, okay? And I was the classic example of that. I was writing journal papers for an ad agency, and I was also having people very upset at work. Okay. I had a very small team, and they were not happy with me. And I think I owe it to the person that had the guts to tell me that they loved listening to me, learning if they didn't work for me. And one person had the guts to say that to me. They were working with me. I was not the easiest person to work for. And they had the guts to say that to me. And I thought I was doing great. No humility whatsoever when you're 23, right? So I thought I was doing great. I thought people were praising me. I was getting bonuses. I was winning pitches. I was a horrible, horrible, horrible leader because I didn't ever think of the world or from their perspective. And I think that's the big difference, I think, over the years is that one person and that one. I completely failed as a leader. But my bosses weren't calling me out. If that person that worked for me never called me out and didn't have the guts to call me out, I would probably be a completely different place. I would probably have a very different career. I would probably have gone on thinking, sliding doors, I would probably not have been able to do a lot of the things that I'm very, very happy and proud and excited about the last couple of years because I've become a bit of a better manager. So my advice would be this. My advice would be, especially if people are telling you you're very good and you're getting all the signals that you're doing very well, and you've just become a manager. You've just become a manager of 4 people. Don't count on my luck that I had 1 person out of 4 that was brave enough to tell me the truth. Don't count on that. Ask for it. Prompt them, give them permission to give you candid feedback. If necessary, if you don't think they can give you candid feedback because you're too scary, get someone else to anonymously collect the feedback for you. Get somebody you trust, like appoint a person, and that person is the one that collects feedback for you. But actively get feedback from the people you manage anonymously, even if the company doesn't require them to give you feedback, because that's the most precious feedback you can get when you first become a manager. It's the truth. Even if it's not horrible like mine was, but there are things that you will learn from the people you manage much more, I think, than the people that are above you. For me, the top tip, don't rely on the luck I had. I was lucky to get 1 brave person. The other 4 would have never told me I sucked. But that 1 person did, and that 1 person changed my life. I still thank that 1 person. We're still friends after 20 years.
That's outstanding advice, Sulin. And feedback is an absolute gift. And if you're not getting it, absolutely seek it out. Yeah.
Seek it out, yeah.
Sulin, you spoke before about the fact that the workplace has been changing for you in terms of being able to be your authentic self, etc. How do you feel the world has changed in relation to its approach to diversity and inclusion in recent times?
I don't think it's changed for everyone. So I'll say how it's changed for more and more companies, but in our region, certainly not the majority of companies.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
I've just been fortunate enough to be in certain industries, tech, telecoms, marketing, where it's probably companies that have made the shift. And there's a whole bunch of more informal or more hierarchical companies where that's not changed at all.
Okay.
So I'll caveat that to say that in our region, it's probably quite mainstream, but certainly not everyone's experience.
Okay.
I think what has changed is that we talk about it very much more so. I think if you go back to when I started work, those 2 words hardly get any mention counts in any sort of management meeting or work meeting, right? So diversity and inclusion. For Grab, I'm probably talk about a little bit about Grab, right?
Yes, please.
So
yeah.
We do make sure. Okay, we generally think we're okay, right? People, all companies, all people, we're probably okay. But what I like about Grab is that we go back. We're very numerical. We go back to the numbers. And we make sure that we are okay. It's not some kind of management group think that we think we're okay, because what we see is the senior management levels. We want to see all levels of the company. And so we do that at a company level, checking kind of numbers for making sure that we have a fairly good representation of also what our customers look like, right? Individually in marketing, we also checked. We went one step further. We didn't just check the levels, gender splits by levels. We also looked at when we rate people as high performers or exceptional performers, is there some sort of unusual bias, And for us, we've at least felt that with the numbers, we're confident that it's not just our own prejudices. We actually think that we're okay from the numbers. But making sure you check, not just kind of scanning around, because scanning around feeds into kind of this management view bias, right? So I think that that's probably what I appreciate most. And Grab's not unique in that. I used to work at Facebook, and it's the same, right? So you do kind of make sure that this is important. You send the message down that this is important, but you also check the metrics to make sure that we're tracking correctly, behaviorally, not just symbolically. So I feel that that's probably been what's been great. And I think that it will take some time for that to move into the mainstream of more hierarchical firms in this region. We'll get there.
Quite insightful and clear there as well, Sulin. That's a very fair statement to say that whilst we're seeing progressive policies in some organisations, we can't say that it's across the board. And the other thing I'd probably reflect on there, it's certainly different country by country. And I think there's some countries that have still got a very long way to go, but we are starting to see some movement, at least in some areas. So, yeah, I think you're right. We shouldn't get too excited that just because we see some companies doing the right thing or at least moving the needle, cannot say at all that that's across the board yet. That's a very fair thing to say.
Just because we have a few women prime ministers and presidents doesn't mean that the world has changed, right?
Yeah, very good.
But I think the other thing that is important about diversity is not just, it's cognitive diversity, I feel, is the most important, right? So you can have a room of all women, and that's also not good. You can have a room of random ratio of genders, but they can all think the same. So I think the greater part of diversity, it's always to make sure that if there's a healthy argument in the room, you're probably diverse enough. If there's healthy arguments about ethics of a certain decision, trade-offs of a certain decision, like, are we benefiting this group of community versus this group? If there's always healthy debate, if people don't, automatically agree with one another, I think that that's a better test of diversity than just looking at like ratios. We do need to make sure that our ratios are not imbalanced, but that's not what success should look like. Success should look like cognitive diversity of every important decision being interrogated enough that we are confident we've got all schools of thought inputted into the decision. 1000%
agree, Sulin. And what we need is diversity of thought. And we need to empower people that they can speak up and have a contra view to even the most senior person in an organisation, etc. And if you don't have some diversity leading towards that diversity of thought, that's when you're going to be in trouble. So if your leadership room is full of people with the same socioeconomic background, the same gender, same age, same educational background, race, ethnicity, etc., they're all just going to agree with each other and pat each other on the back. And whether it be in strategic decisions or even worse, during crisis management, that's not going to help anyone. So, yeah, fully agree. I'd like to talk a little bit about the changes that have happened in the world in just this last 12 months. And I'm looking for a leadership perspective here. How has your leadership style needed to adapt in a work from home environment? You and I, we're both working at home now. I assume that the majority of your team are also working from home and spread across Southeast Asia. How have you had to adapt?
The lucky thing about Grab is we were always a company that runs 50% of our day on Zoom, right? So we're always that kind of company anyway, because we have teams located so many places and it's better to Zoom than to fly.
Okay.
So we were always a very heavily Zoom dependent company anyway. I think there's a couple of different things. One, I will just mention very briefly, practicality. In Southeast Asia, outside of Singapore, bandwidth at home for a lot of people is horrible. Like internet bandwidth outside of Singapore. So there was a bunch of readjustment that we had to make for a lot of employees, allowing them to upgrade their home internet, their home devices, all that kind of stuff, routers and stuff like that. So I think that if you operate in regions where bandwidth is poor, this is something that it sounds like really petty, but it was one of the biggest things that came out in Voice of Employee. Like, my internet sucks was one of the biggest things that came out in our Voice of Employee, and we had to kind of move around that, right? So that's not non-trivial, even though it sounds petty. But the second thing was actually, like, if you take away the IT stuff, we were fine on Zoom. We just needed to fix bandwidth. The thing that I feel we missed the most wasn't the task-based work, right? The task-based work, I think we adjusted fine once we got everybody on the right, home internet. The thing that really sucked a lot was we are a company that has a lot of unscheduled, random discussions.
Okay.
our offices, we're not one of those fancy Silicon Valley companies. We're a very successful tech company, but we still sit in very small offices, okay? That has privileges of people always bumping into one another, always people having unscheduled chats when you sit on somebody's desk and you kind of jam, and you kind of run into somebody in the pantry or in the corridor or in the lift. And I think that entire organic, unscheduled, random discussions, we actually lost out on everything that would have come out of those things. And so we needed, at least in marketing, to figure out a way we can't replicate those because they're organic, but can we force people to have more random work-based assignments or introduce randomness into our ordinary world, because that's an important part of how interesting, unusual work happens, okay? And so we had to figure around, let's do one-day hacks, for marketing, which is unusual. So we had to figure out ways to introduce jamming and more organic type thinking into the teams. And that was hard. And that's also hard because if you imagine, we have countries in different lockdowns at different times. So we have Philippines, the world's longest lockdown it's a year of lockdown next week.
Okay.
And then we have countries that went 0 cases like Vietnam for many, many months. And then they went back into wave 2. So it's hard to kind of angle it. So we've decided to kind of think about this both at country level and as a team. The third thing is actually always end on a high note. It's always also about turning lemons into lemonade. And I think that the people running our conferences, we used to have these things called grab forwards, which were these twice a year kind of inject you with new energy, inject you with new inspiration. Everybody meets, from all the different countries. We meet twice a year. And of course, we couldn't do that anymore from last year. But I think this is the best example of lemons to lemonade, right? So if everybody has to sit virtually, it kind of sucks maybe that, you have a management conference where you're sitting on Zoom for 7 hours. But here's the great bit. All the guests that we couldn't invite to fly all the way to Southeast Asia, now we have access to.
Yeah, good.
So we've got I'm just only going to count. There are too many actually, because we've had a few of these already, but we had Tony Blair.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Management conference. Ariana Huffington.
Yep.
Yesterday, we had Scooter. Is it yesterday? No, day before yesterday. We had Scooter Brown and we had Stuart Butterfield.
Wow.
Founder of Slack, right?
Yep.
So now become the normal bar of who we get as guest speakers. I mean, that was impossible without everybody being from home. So in every horrible situation, there's always that lemonade to be made. And I think that the people organizing our grab forwards have just totally taken it up a notch. When you look at an agenda, you got Tony Blair. And you're like, what?
That's amazing, Sulin. And I really like your attitude, by the way. I mean, you've identified what's missing, which is what I call collision, right? So collision is where someone just bumps into each other in the corridor at the office and someone says, hey, Joe, hey, Jill, hey, what are you working on at the moment? Oh, I'm working on something similar, right? So you're missing that. That's clear. But also the way that you've looked at it as to what are the positives that come out of that. And that's the way I look at it as well. So Grab has implemented, I mentioned it before, they've implemented this Grab for Good program for a positive impact on lives by connecting Southeast Asians, which is just wonderful. But of course, we are talking about International Women's Day today. So what I'd like to specifically ask you is, how do you believe Grab has helped and encouraged women, and perhaps in particular women business owners, to succeed and thrive through things like the Grab for Good program?
I might not touch on the Grab for Good program, right? Because the Grab for Good thing is actually not specifically a program. It's a kind of mindset. So there are things that we do every day because we turn up for work that ends up because the purpose of the company, the overall purpose of the company, is about empowering these micro entrepreneurs, individuals and small businesses to earn an income. That's the overall kind of purpose why the company exists. So whether or not we designate something as a Grab for Good program is maybe immaterial. It's just how we do budgeting, right? So I'll talk about something we do every day and we don't call it Grab for Good, right? In this region, I think you probably know, right? So fairly sizable part of the economy is the informal economy.
Yeah.
It is very, very tiny businesses. You know, in some countries we call them micro SMEs, micropreneurs. But they're very tiny businesses, and they are making they haven't made the transition into the formal economy yet. And women make up a big part of this informal economy in Southeast Asia. A group that's easy to imagine. I mean, women micropreneurs do a lot of different things, but a group that's quite easy to imagine right now for most of you probably is online social sellers. And so if you're an online social seller, you basically make anything or sell anything. It could be fashion items. It could be reselling wholesale stuff. It could be food. A lot of it is food, home industry, kind of cottage industry food, like snacks, cakes, that sort of stuff. And they exploded, right? They were already a very sizable group, but last year was an explosion year. You have a perfect storm of a lot of people needing to make extra income and a lot of people going online because of COVID, because of lockdown. So you had an entire surge of social selling. So we created these before actually COVID happened. We got communities of social sellers on Grab because they're a big audience for us even before COVID, right? What we've seen is that as we started to grow these, we call them boss clubs. And actually, there was a suggestion based on the demographic profile of these clubs that they should be called lady boss clubs, because actually when you look at the membership, it's a lot of women actually. And the most vocal, the most active members in each of the countries tended to be women. And I think that is something that I don't think Grab for Good should be housed in a little corner in a closet that's labeled for good activities or CSR activities. I think why I like going into work here in this company is that you go into work for normal part of business and looking after communities or expanding communities, adding value and engagement workshops and benefits to communities of social sellers and women social sellers. Like, this is part of your everyday 9-to-5 job. And I think that that's how Grab looks at micropreneurs. The second bit is I think we've done enough specifically for women entrepreneurs. I think we've done lots of interesting programs. I don't think we've done enough to look at the unique needs women entrepreneurs. I think we end up because we're looking at wet markets, right? Just because we're looking at the least digital types of businesses and helping to bring them online, we end up by default, a lot of these businesses are women run. If we had angled the lens slightly differently as women businesses, we'd probably look at it slightly differently. We're ending up doing a lot of these things because our kind of named community that we serve is the least digital of Southeast Asia. So we can do more.
So thank you, Sulin. You've really clarified something for me there. And it just seems to me the things that I'm talking about are really underpinned by the values and the vision of what you're trying to achieve. And you still got, you're saying you got a lot to still progress there, but rather than just be Grab for Good being a program, it's really what you're all about. That's really interesting. And that helps me a lot, in fact, to understand exactly what Grab stands for and what you're looking to achieve. The final question I have for you is, do you have any advice for a young woman who might be entering the workforce now? They might be graduating from university this year or looking to enter the workforce now. What's the one thing that you would like to share with them as they go about the start of their career?
Figure out who you are, what you love, what you love, not what other people tell you love, right? Who you are, what you love, what gets you excited, right? And how do you want to if you go into work, whatever that definition of work is for you every day, how would you like to be excited about that, walking in? If you figure those things out, be rather uncompromising about making sure you have those things in your life. If you figure out who you are, stay true to who you are. If you are very, very passionate or excited about something, make sure that in your day-to-day life, 70% of your time is in excitement mode. And I think that if you do those things, there is no way that your life will not be successful or happy. Don't think about what other people think is important. When I do coaching with people, I pointedly ask them, how important is money to you? And I do a trade-off exercise with them, because sometimes in the end, it's not as important as other things, right? So figure out those things, be uncompromising about making the majority of your time spent on things that get you excited, and you'll be totally fine.
That's wonderful advice, Sulin, and thank you so much. Once again, thank you so much for your time today. You've been a true inspiration. This has been one of the best interviews I've ever done. It's been really great to hear your perspective. You were very open and transparent with us about things that have happened in the past and what's important to you personally as well. So I really want to thank you so much. And I hope that we can have you back on the show again sometime, maybe go even deeper into some of those topics. Particularly, I was very impressed with your opening approach around marketing, and that's certainly going to be part of future episodes of the podcast. So thank you so much, Sulin.
Thank you, Mick. It's a good way to kick off the weekend, hopefully. I got half more Friday to go. It's really fun to do.
Excellent.
See you soon.
You've been listening to The Leadership Project with Mick Spears. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please join us again soon as we are joined by Faisal Shah, who is a wake-up mentor and coach for millennials, and we know you're going to enjoy that episode. Please do remember to hit subscribe on your preferred podcast service, and it would be great if you could leave us a review and tell your friends about the show. Until next time, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.